On a freezing winter morning, a young black girl huddled in a thin coat, rushing to school. Then she stopped. Ahead, a pregnant police officer stumbled into the road. A car was racing toward her. Without thinking, the girl moved. She leapt to help. What she didn't know was that this one act of courage would ripple across time, changing not just her life, but her entire family's fate forever. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you're watching from. We love to hear your thoughts. Aaliyah Harper was 12 years old when her world changed. She was small for her age, with deep brown skin, tightly coiled hair pulled back into a fraying ponytail, and eyes that always seemed older than 12. Her father, Marcus Harper, had been arrested and sentenced to prison for a warehouse theft he always said he didn't commit. That day, when the police came to their small, worn-down apartment in the east side of Detroit, everything shifted. Aaliyah remembered clinging to her father's leg, asking him where he was going, why he couldn't stay for dinner, why her mother was crying and yelling at the officers like they had taken something more than just a man in handcuffs. And in truth, they had. From that moment on, the light in their home dimmed. Her mother, Linda, tried her best. She worked early mornings and late nights folding clothes at a local laundromat, hands red and raw from the detergent and steam. Bills piled up faster than they could count, and the rent was always just one late notice away from eviction. Aaliyah learned early not to ask for much. She learned how to cut the mold off bread, and how to make peanut butter last longer by spreading it thinner on toast. She also learned how to smile, even when there wasn't much to smile about. Every morning, Aaliyah helped her mother get her younger brother Leo ready for daycare. He was only 5, full of questions and always asking when Daddy was coming home. Aaliyah would kneel down, zip up his jacket, and whisper gently, "Soon," even though she didn't know if that was true. After dropping him off, she walked to school, her backpack heavier than it should have been, partly from the old textbooks, but mostly from the weight of responsibilities that didn't belong to a child her age. Her shoes were a size too small. The soles had started to peel at the edges, flapping slightly when she walked too fast. Her coat, once her father's oversized hoodie, smelled faintly of him. Grease, aftershave, and something warm she could never quite name. Inside her pocket she kept 2 things: a folded photo of the whole family taken at a church picnic 3 summers ago, and a pale blue handkerchief her dad had stitched her name into when she was 5. The thread was frayed now, but she still ran her thumb along the letters whenever she needed to feel safe. Despite everything, Aaliyah never complained. She did her homework, she helped clean the house, she gave her mother the last piece of toast without being asked, and she always said thank you, even when dinner was only canned soup and crackers. Her teachers said she was polite, respectful, and quiet, but no one really knew what she carried with her when the school bell rang and she walked back through the alley behind the bus depot, cutting through the trash and graffiti, past the corner where older boys smoked and called out names she ignored. Aaliyah's world had become small and heavy, but she didn't let it harden her. Instead, she watched, she noticed things. The old man who slept near the convenience store with a blanket made from garbage bags. The little girl in her building who always wore the same pink dress, even in the winter. The mailman who stopped to leave extra coupons in her mom's mailbox. Aaliyah believed, quietly, deeply, that kindness mattered, even if it didn't fix anything. She didn't know that soon one small act of kindness from her would set something extraordinary into motion. Something that would begin not with anger or resistance, but with a simple human gesture. Offering help when no one else would. And though she couldn't see it coming, the day that would change everything was just around the corner. It happened on a Wednesday morning, colder than usual, the kind where your breath hung in the air and the wind cut through clothes like they weren't even there. Aaliyah had just dropped off Leo at the church daycare and was heading toward the schoolyard, her fingers tucked deep into the sleeves of her worn hoodie. She usually kept her head down, her steps quick, but that day, something pulled her gaze toward the intersection at Parker and 5th, where she saw the police cruiser, lights off, parked sideways, and standing beside it was a woman in uniform, holding her belly and swaying like she might fall. The officer was tall, with blonde hair pulled back into a tight bun beneath her hat, and her face was pale, the color of wet paper. One hand clutched the open car door, the other rested over her swollen stomach. Aaliyah slowed her steps. At first she thought the officer was just resting, maybe catching her breath. But then the woman took a shaky step backward and stumbled right into the road. At that exact moment, a delivery van came barreling down Fifth, tires screeching as it rounded the corner too fast. The driver hit the horn, but the officer didn't move. She didn't even look. She froze like a statue, wide-eyed and dazed, her body tilting toward the pavement, and in that split second, Alyssa's legs moved before her mind could. She ran. Her backpack flew off her shoulder, slamming against the concrete as she darted across the street, boots slipping on icy patches. She could hear someone shouting, maybe the driver, but all she focused on was the officer's face, the way it looked scared and blank at the same time. Aaliyah reached her just as the van swerved, tires skimming the curb with a thunderous screech. She lunged forward, throwing both arms around the officer's waist and yanking her back with all the strength a 12-year-old girl could manage. They crashed to the sidewalk, the woman landing on her side, Alyssa's small arms still wrapped tightly around her. The van sped off down the street without stopping. For a moment, everything was quiet. The officer coughed, then groaned. Aaliyah scrambled to her knees, brushing snow and salt from the woman's coat. "Ma'am," she asked, breathless, "are you okay? Can you hear me?" The officer nodded slowly, blinking back the dizziness. Yeah, I think so," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I just got lightheaded." "You almost got hit," Aaliyah said, eyes wide. "That van didn't even stop." The woman shifted, one hand moving protectively over her stomach. "The baby's okay," she murmured, more to herself than to Aaliyah. Aaliyah stood and pulled the scarf from around her neck, wrapping it gently around the officer's hands. "You're freezing. You need to sit for a minute." The woman looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. Her eyes were glassy but filled with something soft, surprise, maybe even wonder. "What's your name?" she asked. Aaliyah Harper." "Thank you, Aaliyah. You saved me, you really did." Aaliyah gave a small shrug, but her voice was steady. "You looked like you needed help, that's all." Officer Melanie Brooks didn't know it yet, but that moment, when a small, skinny girl gave her warmth, protection, and zero hesitation, was going to stay with her far longer than the shock of almost being hit. It wasn't just the rescue. It was the way Aaliyah had moved like it was the most natural thing in the world to risk herself for someone else. It was how she gave up her scarf, how she crouched next to her without fear, how her hands didn't tremble once. That day, after the ambulance came to check on her, and after she insisted she was fine and refused to be taken to the hospital, Melanie sat in her cruiser and stared at the frayed scarf in her lap. The scent of it was faintly sweet, something like cinnamon and laundry soap. And for reasons she couldn't explain, it made her want to cry. She didn't know who Aaliyah really was, not yet. But something in her heart told her that little girl's kindness wasn't just a random moment. It was a thread connected to something bigger, something that somehow she'd now become part of. In the days that followed the near accident, something quiet and beautiful began to grow between Aaliyah and Officer Brooks. Every morning that Aaliyah spotted the familiar patrol car parked near the corner store, she would hurry inside with the few crumpled dollars she'd saved from helping her mom fold laundry at the laundromat and buy a small carton of warm milk. Then, with mittened hands and that ever-gentle voice, she would walk over to the cruiser, tap on the window, and hold out the drink like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You looked cold," she'd say simply. "This'll help." Officer Brooks, Melanie, would smile, sometimes through tears she didn't let fall, and take the milk with both hands like it was a gift far greater than its price. They began to talk. Nothing forced, just short conversations at first. About the weather, about how school was going. But then the talks deepened. Aaliyah would sit beside her on the curb during breaks, legs crossed, her small frame bundled in an oversized hoodie that clearly wasn't made for the bitter wind. She told Melanie about her little brother Leo, who had a laugh like bubbles, about her mother Linda, who worked until her feet swelled and still made time to comb Aaliyah's hair on Sunday mornings, and eventually about her father Marcus. She didn't tell it like a sob story. That wasn't Aaliyah's way. She told it plain, how her dad had worked night shifts as a warehouse guard, how one morning he just didn't come home, how they said he stole boxes of electronics from the place he worked, even though no one ever found the items, and how the video footage showed a man in a hoodie, But her dad didn't even own one like that. "He's not like that," she said one day, her voice soft but sure. "Hammett taught me to always tell the truth. He used to say, people can take your things, but they can't take your good name unless you let them." Melanie listened carefully, sometimes forgetting the cold altogether, her gloved hands wrapped around the warm milk Alyssa had brought. Something about the girl's honesty, her kindness, her patience in the face of so much, moved her in a way she couldn't explain. One morning, as the city was just beginning to wake and a pink light broke across the skyline, Melanie looked at Alyssa and asked, "If you could have anything, sweetheart, anything at all, what would you wish for?" Alyssa didn't blink. She didn't pause. She just looked up, eyes shining with clarity, and said, "I'd want my dad back, that's all. I don't care about toys or money or even Christmas. I just want him home." That night, Melanie couldn't sleep. She lay in bed next to her husband, Ethan, and stared at the ceiling long after the lights were off. "I met this girl," she finally said, voice low in the dark. "Her name's Alyssa. She saved me, Ethan, really saved me. And she's the kindest person I've ever met. She's been through hell, but she still brings me warm milk every morning like it's the only thing that matters. And she told me something today. Something about her dad." Ethan turned to face her. "What about him?" "He's in prison. For something she swears he didn't do. She's just a kid, but when she talks about him, you believe her. I can't explain it. Could you look into it, just see?" Ethan nodded. He worked with a non-profit that helped with wrongful conviction cases when time allowed. "Yeah, I'll see what I can find." It only took a few days. The files were thin, too thin for a conviction that carried 5 years. No physical evidence had been recovered. The security footage, once reviewed, showed a man of similar build, but the image was grainy, the timestamp flickering in one corner. Ethan frowned as he rewatched it. Something felt off. And then he saw it. The man in the video used his right hand to open the storage unit and wore a thick silver ring on that hand. Ethan checked the arrest report. Marcus Harper had lost 2 fingers on his right hand in a factory accident 10 years ago, an old injury, fully documented, impossible to miss. The key witness, a co-worker who claimed to have seen Marcus near the warehouse that night, had since moved out of the country. His testimony had never been cross-examined. No follow-up, no alternate suspect, no recovered goods. The entire case leaned on 2 shaky legs. Ethan gathered the details and submitted a formal review request to the county prosecutor's office, attaching a letter outlining the inconsistencies and the overlooked evidence. The current prosecutor, newly elected and known for wanting to correct past mistakes, read through the documents and agreed to a re-evaluation. A week later, Ethan got the call. "We'll move forward with a re-examination," the prosecutor said. "Thank you for bringing this to our attention." It hadn't taken a media storm. It hadn't taken courtroom shouting or battles against the system. It had taken kindness. A girl offering milk on a cold morning, a woman who listened, and a man who chose to act. That was all. And it was enough. It was a cold, gray morning when the letter arrived. Linda Harper found it in their rusted mailbox, wedged between utility bills and a coupon flyer, its envelope plain but official-looking. She opened it with trembling fingers in the dim light of their kitchen, eyes moving slowly across each printed word. Her knees nearly gave out. That afternoon, Elisa came home from school to find her mother sitting at the table, the letter laid out neatly before her, her hands covering her mouth as if afraid to speak it aloud. "They're reopening your father's case," she whispered. "They're going to take another look." Elisa didn't say anything at first. She just stared at her mother, blinked, and then reached down into her pocket, pulling out the frayed blue handkerchief with her name stitched into it. She held it tight and nodded. Within a week, the re-examination was underway. It wasn't a trial, not yet, just a quiet gathering at the courthouse where a judge would review the newly submitted evidence. Ethan Brooks attended on behalf of the Harper family, standing tall but calm as he presented the inconsistencies, the missing physical evidence, the unreliable witness, and the crucial detail in the surveillance video that had been ignored, a ring on a right hand that Marcus Harper simply... The prosecutor, after cross-verifying Ethan's submission and confirming Marcus's old injury through medical records, made no argument to resist. There was no dramatic shouting, no gavel slamming, no press in the hallway, just a simple nod from the judge, and a line of words that felt louder than any verdict Alyssa had ever imagined. This court finds sufficient doubt in the conviction of Mr. Marcus Harper. The charges are hereby vacated. 3 days later, Marcus walked out of prison. Alyssa stood near the gates, bundled in the same hoodie she always wore, her fingers clenched around the edges of her sleeves. Leo clung to Linda's side, bouncing on his toes. When Marcus stepped into view, thinner than before, but smiling, really smiling, Alyssa broke into a run. She didn't shout, didn't cry out his name. She just ran, arms wide, feet slapping against the cold pavement, and crashed into him so hard they both stumbled backward. "Hi, Daddy," she said into his chest. "I told them you didn't do it." He knelt down, holding both his kids in his arms, eyes red with tears that he didn't bother to hide. Linda stood behind them, a hand covering her heart, her lips trembling but curved into the first full smile she'd worn in years. Melanie Brooks stood quietly to the side, watching from a respectful distance, her own hand resting gently on her belly, the baby inside her beginning to kick. She met Alyssa's gaze and nodded once. Alyssa nodded back. The days that followed moved fast, but for once they moved in the right direction. Ethan offered Marcus a job at the non-profit where he worked. Light security duties, nothing too strenuous, just something stable to help him get back on his feet. Melanie, without hesitation, helped Linda secure a position at the front desk of the local precinct, organizing paperwork and greeting visitors with that soft, steady voice of hers. For the first time in years, there was money in the fridge, not just food. The lights stayed on. Leo got a real winter coat, and Alyssa didn't have to walk to school with holes in her shoes. One evening, as snow fell softly against the windows of their new apartment, smaller than most, but bright and warm, Alyssa sat on the couch with her father, sorting through a small box of old family pictures he'd kept, safe even through prison transfers. "I thought about this day every single night," Marcus said, his voice quiet. "I didn't know if it would come. But you never gave up on me." Alyssa smiled and handed him the blue handkerchief. "I told you, I never let go." And he took it, holding it in both hands like it was something sacred. "Kindness," he said softly. "That's what brought me home." And Alyssa nodded, resting her head on his shoulder as the snow kept falling, and the world outside finally felt like it was starting to make sense again. Years passed, but Alyssa never forgot. Not the sound of her father's voice the day he came home, not the way her mother cried into his shoulder like she'd been holding her breath for years. Not the quiet nod Officer Brooks gave her from across the street as if to say, "You did this." Those moments didn't fade with time. They rooted themselves inside her, shaped her, and grew with her. By the time Alyssa turned 17, the Harper family had found something they'd gone years without: peace. It wasn't perfect. There were still tight months, still old wounds that ached when the weather changed or a bad memory surfaced. But they were together. And that was everything. Marcus kept his job with the legal nonprofit, showing up early every morning, keys jangling at his side, nodding respectfully at the lawyers who passed him in the hallways. He never missed a day. Linda, with her calm and steady nature, became a fixture at the precinct, someone people trusted, someone who made things feel just a little more human. Leo grew fast and loud and happy, never fully remembering the years without his dad, and maybe that was a blessing. Alyssa, meanwhile, began spending her Saturdays volunteering at the very same office where Ethan worked. She started small, filing papers, organizing client files, but quickly became the unofficial welcome face for anyone who walked through the door. People listened when she spoke. Maybe it was her voice, gentle and clear, or maybe it was something deeper, something you could only carry after you've lived through loss and still chosen kindness. On the day of her high school graduation, Alyssa stood at the podium as class valedictorian, her voice steady, her eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on her family. "When I was younger," she said, "I thought I needed to be powerful to change things. I thought I had to be loud or important or perfect. But I was wrong. Because kindness, just quiet, simple kindness, was the thing that changed my whole world, not all at once, but one cup of warm milk at a time. One moment of listening, one hand reaching out to another." That night, when the Harper family gathered around the table in their now bright kitchen, Marcus raised his glass of sweet tea and said, "To Alyssa, who showed us all the way." But that wasn't the end. A year later, Alyssa earned a scholarship to study pre-law at a local university. She still came home every weekend, still helped her mom clip coupons on Sunday mornings, still read to Leo before bed. But her heart stretched further now, toward classrooms filled with law books, toward internships in courtrooms, toward clients who reminded her of who her dad used to be, someone wrongly judged and left behind. Eventually, with the help of Melanie and Ethan, who became her mentors and family in every way that mattered, Alyssa opened her own small legal clinic right in the heart of Detroit. It wasn't flashy, the walls were simple, the furniture second-hand, but the door was always open, and people came, single mothers, struggling veterans, young kids with trembling voices, all of them carrying stories that Alyssa understood before they even said a word. One afternoon, a little girl about 10 years old walked into the clinic holding a worn lunchbox and a folded piece of paper. She was shy, eyes wide. Alyssa knelt to her level and smiled. "Hi there, I'm Alyssa. How can I help you today?" The girl held out the note, scribbled in a messy scrawl. "My mom says you help people who feel small." Alyssa took the paper gently and nodded. "Ah, that's exactly what we do." And as the girl settled into the chair, Alyssa glanced at the small frame hanging beside her desk, a blue handkerchief with her name stitched in faded thread resting under glass. She didn't need to look at it often, but when she did, it reminded her where it all began. Not in a courtroom, not with a headline, but with kindness. That was where justice really started, and that's where it would always begin. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.